Ethan Whitmore was the kind of man whose name alone could command attention in boardrooms, gala events, and the pages of financial magazines alike. At 42, he had built a tech empire from scratch, a conglomerate that spanned continents, employing thousands and generating billions in revenue. His wealth was staggering, his influence immense, yet in the midst of all that power, there was a quiet emptiness that gnawed at him, a void that no stock portfolio, no multi-million-dollar deal, and no luxury penthouse could ever fill. The Whitmore Tower, a sleek glass and steel skyscraper that dominated downtown Manhattan, served as both his fortress and his stage. Inside, everything ran like clockwork, assistants scuttled efficiently from one meeting to the next, security personnel monitored every inch, and the latest AI systems ensured no opportunity was ever missed. Ethan moved through this world with the precision of a master chess player, anticipating moves and planning 5 steps ahead. Yet, for all his strategic genius, he was ill-prepared for the one thing he couldn't control: human connection. Ethan's personal life was a stark contrast to his professional triumphs. He had long since distanced himself from relationships that demanded vulnerability, preferring the predictable certainty of contracts over the messy, unpredictable nature of love. Romantic entanglements had come and gone, often ending in disappointment, and friendships rarely lasted beyond superficial exchanges. The truth was, Ethan had built walls not only around his fortune but also around his heart. His only companion in this carefully curated solitude was the echo of his own ambitions, a constant reminder of what he had sacrificed to reach the top. Every morning, Ethan followed a meticulously rehearsed routine. He would wake before dawn, jog along the empty streets of Manhattan, and review the world's financial news with the intensity of a man preparing for battle. Breakfast was a brief affair, protein shake in hand while scanning emails from executives across the globe. By 8 o'clock, he would be in his corner office, the city sprawling beneath him like a living, breathing testament to his success. To an outsider, Ethan's life seemed enviable: luxurious apartments in New York and Paris, a private jet waiting on standby, and invitations to exclusive events that most could only dream of attending. But despite the glittering facade, there lingered a quiet, almost imperceptible ache, a longing for something genuine, something that money couldn't buy. On this particular morning, Ethan sat in his office, staring out over the city, a steaming cup of coffee untouched on his desk. His mind wandered beyond stock charts and acquisition proposals to a question he rarely allowed himself to ask: was there more to life than this? A life built on calculations and returns but devoid of real connection, of laughter and warmth that didn't come with a price tag. He sighed and turned back to his computer, scrolling through an endless stream of messages. Investors, board members, and partners clamored for his attention, each demanding a piece of the man who seemed to have it all. And yet, deep down, Ethan knew he didn't have it all, not in the way that truly mattered. The realization was subtle, almost ghostly, but it lingered in the back of his mind like a quiet warning: wealth could open doors, but it could never teach a man how to feel at home in the company of another human being. And so, in the heart of Manhattan, surrounded by opulence and success, Ethan Whitmore continued to rule his empire with an iron fist, but the throne he sat upon was lonely, and the man who seemed invincible on the outside was quietly searching for something he couldn't yet define. Something, or someone, that could break through the walls he had built, and awaken a part of him he had long forgotten existed. It was a late autumn afternoon when Ethan's carefully controlled world first began to tremble. He had left the office earlier than usual, claiming a rare desire to take a walk through Central Park. The city, bathed in golden sunlight and the fiery hues of falling leaves, felt almost magical, a temporary escape from the relentless demands of his empire. He wandered along the winding paths, hands in pockets, eyes scanning the horizon, but his mind was still preoccupied with quarterly projections and merger plans. Then, he saw her. At first, she appeared to be just another passerby, a young woman sitting alone on a park bench, sketchbook in hand. Her hair was a cascade of chestnut waves, illuminated by the soft autumn light, and her eyes, a vivid shade of green, were fixed intently on the page in front of her. There was a serenity about her that seemed entirely out of place in the bustling city, as though she existed in her own world, untouched by the noise and chaos surrounding her. Something about that quiet focus caught Ethan off guard. Curiosity, an emotion he rarely allowed himself, nudged him closer. He could see the way her pencil moved with confidence and fluidity, creating lines that spoke of talent and a rare attention to detail. Ethan, accustomed to numbers and contracts, found himself fascinated by the artistry of someone whose world was entirely unlike his own. He was drawn to her in a way he hadn't felt for years, a pull that defied logic and strategy. "Excuse me," he said, his voice cutting through the ambient hum of the park. She looked up, startled, and for a moment their eyes met, an exchange brief but electric, like the first spark before a fire ignites. She smiled politely, a small tilt of the lips that hinted at kindness but also a touch of caution. "I didn't mean to interrupt," Ethan continued, clearing his throat. "Your work, it's incredible. May I ask what you're drawing?" The woman hesitated, glancing at the sketchbook and then back at him, her expression a mixture of amusement and wariness. "It's just some ideas I'm working on." "Nothing important," she said softly, her voice carrying a melody that lingered in Ethan's mind long after she spoke. Ethan felt an unfamiliar impulse to press further, to know more about this mysterious stranger. "It's more than just ideas. There's something alive in your work. You can't hide talent like this." Her gaze softened, and she closed the sketchbook partially, as if willing to share a sliver of herself. "You're kind to say that." "I'm Arya," she said, extending her hand. Ethan took it, noting the warmth and firmness in her touch, an unexpected reassurance that contrasted sharply with the cold, transactional nature of his usual encounters. "I'm Ethan Whitmore," he replied. The name seemed to surprise her for a split second, though she quickly masked her reaction. "I've heard of you," she said cautiously. "Your company, your work, it's impressive." Ethan chuckled, a sound rare and unguarded. "And yet here I am, feeling like a stranger to my own life. All the wealth in the world, and somehow I don't know what matters anymore." He paused, studying her face for any sign of judgment, but found only curiosity and quiet understanding. They fell into conversation, hesitant at first, but gradually flowing with a rhythm neither had expected. Arya spoke of her art, her struggles to make a name for herself in a city that often overlooked raw talent, and her dreams of creating something that could touch lives. Ethan, in turn, spoke cautiously about the pressures of his world, careful to reveal just enough of the man behind the fortune. For the first time in years, Ethan felt a bridge forming between himself and another person, not built on power, contracts, or wealth, but on genuine connection. He was captivated by the way she viewed the world, with honesty and hope, qualities he had long dismissed as naive or irrelevant. Yet here they were, two people from entirely different universes, finding a shared moment in a crowded park. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the paths, Ethan realized he didn't want the encounter to end. He wanted to know more, to peel back the layers of her life as she had begun to glimpse his. And in that instant, a quiet, undeniable thought took root in his mind: perhaps this chance encounter wasn't random at all. Perhaps it was the first step towards something he had unknowingly been searching for, a life that felt real, a connection that transcended power and wealth, and the possibility of a heart capable of being truly seen. As they parted that evening, Ethan felt an unusual pull to turn back, to say something more, but he held himself back. Yet neither of them walked away unchanged. Arya's green eyes lingered in his memory, a vivid reminder that even in a life defined by control, unpredictability could still spark wonder. And Ethan, for the first time in decades, felt the fragile stirrings of hope that perhaps, finally, he could rediscover what it truly meant to live. 2 days after their unexpected encounter in Central Park, Ethan found himself unable to shake Arya from his thoughts. Her laughter, the way her eyes sparkled when she talked about her art, even the faint scent of her perfume lingered in his memory. He returned to his office late that afternoon, hoping to focus on contracts and projections, but each document felt meaningless, each meeting hollow. The city skyline through his glass-walled office reminded him of the empire he had built, but also of the emptiness he had carefully concealed beneath it. It was then that his assistant, a sharp-minded woman named Claire, interrupted his brooding. "Mr. Whitmore, there's someone here to see you. He says it's urgent and confidential." Ethan arched an eyebrow. "Send them in." The man who entered was older, impeccably dressed, and exuded an aura of quiet authority. His hair was silver, perfectly combed, and his eyes held a depth that suggested experience and cunning in equal measure. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, bowing slightly. "My name is Donovan Harker. I represent a very particular client, and I believe he has an opportunity that will interest you." Ethan, cautious yet intrigued, gestured for him to continue. "Go on." Donovan produced a sleek tablet and tapped a few times before a holographic image shimmered to life in front of Ethan. A sprawling estate, a private island with crystal-clear waters, and a fleet of sleek yachts were displayed in vivid detail. Ethan's breath caught. "Is this real?" he asked. "Absolutely," Donovan replied, his tone measured. "But it's not just about wealth. My client is looking for someone to manage a new venture, something that could redefine industries. He wants someone he can trust implicitly, someone capable of thinking beyond conventional limits. He has been observing you, Mr. Whitmore, and believes you are the perfect fit." Ethan leaned back in his chair, processing the words. He had built an empire from nothing, yet the allure of a new challenge, cloaked in mystery and promise, tugged at him in a way he hadn't felt in years. "And what exactly does he want me to do?" Donovan's gaze sharpened. "This project is highly sensitive. It involves acquisitions, international partnerships, and discreet negotiations that could make or break markets. You would not just be managing it, you would be shaping its direction entirely. And here's the catch, it comes with one condition. My client insists that whoever takes this role must keep their personal life separate. No distractions. Complete discretion is mandatory." Ethan frowned, aware of the double-edged nature of such a proposition. Power, wealth, and influence, the things he had chased relentlessly, were being offered again, but with stakes higher than ever. "And what's in it for him?" he asked cautiously. Donovan's eyes glinted. "My client values vision and loyalty above all. He believes in rewarding brilliance, and the financial incentives alone are substantial. But more than that, he wants someone capable of making decisions without hesitation, someone willing to gamble everything for the sake of innovation." Ethan rubbed his temples. He had spent decades controlling every aspect of his life, yet the idea of stepping into a venture where unpredictability was inevitable both terrified and thrilled him. He thought of Arya, the way she had reminded him of the beauty and uncertainty of life, the way she had stirred emotions long buried. Could he truly commit to a role that demanded complete isolation from everything personal? Donovan seemed to read his thoughts. "You have your doubts, I can see. My client anticipated that. But consider this, those who seize opportunities like this rarely get a second chance. And for someone of your talents, the rewards could be extraordinary, not just in wealth, but in legacy. You could redefine your world." Ethan's mind raced. He imagined a life where every decision mattered, where risk and reward existed in a delicate balance, and where he could prove to himself that he still possessed the vision that had built his empire. Yet the idea of losing the fragile connection he had just begun to form with Arya gnawed at him. "Take the weekend to think it over," Donovan said, as if reading Ethan's hesitation. "But remember, Mr. Whitmore, opportunities like this are fleeting. My client wants an answer by Monday morning. Choose wisely." After Donovan left, Ethan remained seated, staring at the city skyline as evening descended. The golden lights of Manhattan shimmered like stars come down to earth, but his thoughts were elsewhere, on a woman he barely knew and a venture that promised to change everything he had ever known. For the first time in decades, he realized that life was about more than control and strategy, it was about risk, connection, and the courage to embrace the unknown. Ethan knew one thing, whatever choice he made, nothing would ever be the same again. And deep down, he suspected that the upcoming days would test not just his intelligence, but the very heart he had long kept locked away. The weekend arrived, but Ethan found little solace in the calm of his penthouse. The city below moved as always, bright, bustling, and oblivious to the inner turmoil of the man who had once believed he could control everything. He wandered from his office to the balcony and back, replaying Donovan's words over and over. A new venture, a mysterious client, unparalleled power, but at what cost? As the sun dipped behind the horizon, a memory surfaced unbidden. A decade ago, Ethan had been blindsided by Betrayal. His closest partner, someone he had trusted like a brother, had stolen a deal worth millions. The loss had nearly ruined him, but it had also hardened him, teaching him to guard not just his assets, but his heart. That memory, vivid and painful, reminded him why he had kept Arya at a distance, why he had shielded himself from vulnerability. Yet now, he felt the pull of something different, something that could both terrify and exhilarate him. Late that evening, a knock at the door startled him. It was Claire, holding a sealed envelope and looking unusually serious. "This came for you, sir," she said, her voice unusually tense. "No return address." Ethan took the envelope and tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of thick, expensive stationery. In elegant handwriting, it read. Ethan Whitmore. Your past is closer than you think. Some truths have been buried for decades, but they have a way of surfacing. Beware whom you trust. Not everyone who smiles with you is an ally. A friend. His heart skipped a beat. He scanned the room instinctively, half expecting someone to emerge from the shadows, but it was empty. The city's hum seemed muted, almost sinister. Ethan had faced threats before, corporate sabotage, blackmail, but this was different. This was personal, intimate, a ghost from the shadows whispering that even he was not untouchable. The note stirred a storm of memories he had tried to bury. A deal gone wrong in Geneva, a betrayal in Shanghai, faces of former colleagues whose loyalty had been mere illusion. He remembered someone he had trusted implicitly, who had vanished after a catastrophic misstep, leaving him to bear the consequences alone. Ethan realized, with a sinking feeling, that this warning was not just about the past, it was about the future too. Sleep came fitfully that night, haunted by images of shadowy figures and whispered threats. When dawn broke, Ethan resolved to act. He started by reviewing old contracts, legal documents, and correspondence. Every transaction, every partnership, every handshake suddenly seemed fraught with hidden agendas. He contacted his legal team, instructing them to dig into every past ally, every associate, and even acquaintances who had seemed innocuous. Meanwhile, Arya's voice echoed in his mind, reminding him of the warmth he had felt in her presence. He realized that while the shadows of the past threatened to consume him, there was also a beacon, something genuine, something human that he couldn't ignore. But he knew he had to separate emotion from strategy. The venture Donovan had mentioned was looming, and if he stepped into it blindly, he could be walking straight into a trap. By mid-afternoon, a revelation struck him. One of the contracts he had signed years ago, buried under layers of bureaucracy, contained a clause that, if manipulated, could give someone unexpected leverage over him. Ethan's pulse quickened as he realized the potential implications. Whoever had sent the note might be aware of this loophole, which meant they were not only watching him, they knew his vulnerabilities. Determined not to be outmaneuvered, Ethan devised a plan. He would proceed cautiously with the mysterious offer, but he would also investigate the sender of the note. Every decision he made now had to be deliberate, precise, and protective of both his legacy and his newfound emotional connection with Arya. As evening fell again, Ethan stood on his balcony, looking out at the city lights. The shadows of his past were long and formidable, but he also recognized the faint glow of possibility. Power, risk, and love, they were all intertwined, and the choices he made in the coming days would define not just his empire, but who he truly was beneath the polished surface of wealth and control. For the first time in years, Ethan understood that the past could not be ignored. It had to be faced, confronted, and outwitted, before he could step into a future that was truly his own. Ethan's mornings had never felt this heavy. The note from the mysterious friend lingered in his mind, casting a shadow over even the simplest decisions. But the real challenge was waiting: Donovan's project, the venture that promised staggering returns but carried risks that could topple even a titan. Today, Ethan would meet the first representatives, those who would test not only his intellect but his instincts. The meeting was set in a sleek glass tower in downtown Manhattan, its reflective surfaces giving the illusion of infinite corridors and hidden eyes. Ethan entered the conference room with calculated calm, though inside, a storm brewed. Donovan was already there, flanked by two strangers, one a sharply dressed woman with piercing green eyes, the other a man whose calm demeanor belied an aura of quiet menace. "Ethan," Donovan greeted, his tone casual yet precise, "I'd like you to meet the core team for our first evaluation. Every decision you make here will ripple across the project. Are you ready?" Ethan nodded, forcing a controlled smile. "Ready as I'll ever be. Let's begin." The woman, introduced as Marissa, began presenting the initial phase of the project, a revolutionary energy initiative that promised to redefine urban infrastructure. The plan was brilliant on paper: a fusion of green technology, autonomous systems, and high-yield investments. But as she spoke, Ethan noticed subtle inconsistencies in the data. Figures that didn't quite align, projections that assumed improbabilities, and strategic risks that seemed carefully hidden. He leaned forward, asking pointed questions. "Your projections for energy output, these assume a 15% efficiency gain within the first quarter. How exactly do you plan to achieve that, given the current technological constraints?" Marissa's eyes flickered, just enough to reveal tension beneath her composed exterior. "We have several experimental techniques in place, proprietary protocols that..." Ethan interrupted gently but firmly. "Proprietary or untested? Because if these aren't verified, this entire foundation could collapse." Donovan observed silently, a faint smile playing on his lips. Ethan realized immediately that this was no ordinary meeting. It wasn't just a presentation, it was a test. A test to see if he would notice the cracks, if he could spot the danger before it manifested. And in that realization, adrenaline surged through him. The man beside Marissa, introduced as Julian, spoke next. His role was to outline the financial implications. "We're asking for initial seed capital of $50 million, he said, voice calm, almost hypnotic. "Projected returns are exponential within 6 months. Delay in funding could cost competitive advantage." Ethan's mind raced. $50 million was nothing to him in isolation, but the way Julian framed it, the urgency, the implicit threat, was designed to pressure. Ethan remained silent, letting the words hang. He was no stranger to high-stakes negotiations, and he knew that a rushed decision here could cost him far more than money, it could compromise his empire. Finally, Donovan leaned back, breaking the silence. "Ethan, you see it, don't you? The discrepancies. The pressure. This is a game of perception as much as strategy. How you respond determines whether you are a player or a pawn." Ethan's gaze swept the room, calculating, analyzing. He recognized the psychological edge Donovan had built into this scenario. Every statement, every data point, every confident smile was calibrated to provoke a reaction. But Ethan had survived betrayals before. He knew the value of patience, observation, and intuition. He spoke slowly, deliberately. "I see potential here, but I also see risk that could cost not only money but credibility. I will need to conduct an independent verification of your data and projections before moving forward. If the foundation is sound, I'm in. If not," his eyes met Donovan's. "Then this venture stops before it starts." A beat of silence followed. Marissa's face was inscrutable, Julian's calm demeanor didn't falter. Donovan, however, let out a low, impressed chuckle. "Exactly what I wanted to hear. The first test isn't about the money, it's about integrity, discernment, and courage. You passed, Ethan." Yet even as the meeting adjourned, Ethan felt the tension linger. He knew the real challenges lay ahead. Donovan's project was only the first of many tests, and the shadows of his past would not wait idly. Someone had warned him, someone knew his vulnerabilities, and that knowledge could be leveraged in countless ways. On his way back to the penthouse, Ethan reviewed every conversation, every slide, every subtle gesture from the meeting. The pieces were scattered across multiple dimensions: financial, strategic, psychological. And somewhere within that intricate puzzle was the key to surviving this venture and uncovering who had sent the ominous note. Arriving home, he found a single red envelope on his desk, identical to the first. His pulse quickened. Inside, a handwritten message simply said, "Good. But the real test begins tonight." Ethan exhaled slowly, realizing the stakes were higher than ever. This wasn't just business. It was personal, dangerous, and perhaps the most important challenge of his life. The city was alive with lights and distant sirens, but inside Ethan's penthouse, a strange tension hovered in the air. The red envelope lay on the desk like a silent sentinel, daring him to act. The words, "The real test begins tonight," were burned into his mind, leaving an unsettling mixture of curiosity and dread. Ethan knew this wasn't a coincidence, it was a calculated move, designed to unsettle, to force him into action without revealing the rules of the game. He double-checked his security systems, scanning every camera feed and sensor around the apartment. Everything appeared normal, yet Ethan's instincts screamed otherwise. Whoever was behind this was meticulous, patient, and possibly watching his every move. He poured a glass of bourbon, letting the amber liquid calm his nerves while his mind raced. At precisely 9:15 p.m., a soft chime echoed from the intercom. A delivery drone, unmarked and silent, hovered at the balcony door. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He approached cautiously, his hand hovering over the keypad that controlled the door lock. Inside the drone was another envelope, black this time, with no writing, only a small, engraved emblem he didn't recognize. He hesitated, then opened it. A folded piece of paper revealed a single line written in flawless script. "Meet me at the Hudson Pier. Midnight. Alone. Or everything you protect will fall." Ethan's blood ran cold. The specificity, the threat, it was personal, and he knew the stakes were real. His instincts screamed that this wasn't a bluff, someone was willing to test not only his wealth but his courage, his judgment, and perhaps the lives of those he cared about. He considered calling Donovan, but the note made it clear, this was meant to be his choice, his risk, his responsibility. Ethan grabbed a sleek black coat, slipped his phone into an inside pocket, and left the penthouse with a calculated calm that masked the storm inside him. The Hudson Pier was desolate, the wind slicing through the night like a knife. The dim glow of streetlights reflected off the rippling water, giving the pier an eerie, almost surreal appearance. Ethan moved with the quiet precision of someone trained to observe every shadow, every ripple of movement, and every sound. A figure emerged from the darkness, a tall man in a tailored suit, his face obscured by the brim of a hat. "Ethan Gray?" the man asked, voice low and measured. "That's me," Ethan replied evenly, keeping his hand near his coat pocket where a small defensive device was concealed. "You received the first envelope. The second confirms you're serious. But this is just the beginning. There are eyes everywhere, and the game is not what you think," the stranger said, his tone carrying a chilling calmness. Ethan studied him carefully. The man's posture, his choice of words, the deliberate way he avoided direct eye contact, it all suggested training, experience, and purpose. "Who are you? Why involve me in this?" Ethan asked. The stranger smiled faintly, a ghost of amusement in the shadows. "I am a messenger. My job isn't to explain, only to ensure you understand one thing: trust no one. Not even the people you consider allies. Your fortune, your empire, and your legacy are being evaluated, and failures are not tolerated." Ethan's mind raced. Donovan's project, the envelopes, the cryptic messages, it was all part of a much larger game, and he was only at the first move. "What exactly is being tested?" he asked, though he suspected the answer wouldn't come easily. "Your intellect, your courage, your loyalty to yourself," the man said. He stepped back, pulling a small device from his pocket, a card scanner that projected a holographic map of the city, highlighting a dozen locations. "Every choice you make tonight will have consequences. Some visible. Some hidden. One wrong step, and everything you've built could vanish." Ethan studied the map, noting familiar addresses, offices, warehouses, even a private gallery he owned. Each point seemed innocent at first glance, but he understood that in this game, appearances were deceiving. The man's warning wasn't idle. Someone had orchestrated a test where failure was designed to exploit both personal and financial vulnerabilities. "You'll need to navigate carefully, Ethan. Time is short, and the first decision is critical," the stranger added, before disappearing silently into the shadows as if he had never been there. Ethan exhaled, his pulse quickening. He looked at the holographic map again, analyzing the first location highlighted in red. It was a storage facility he had never considered significant, yet its sudden prominence suggested something critical, an initial puzzle, a trap, or perhaps a key to understanding the bigger scheme. The night stretched ahead, dark and uncertain, full of hidden threats and calculated risks. Ethan knew one thing for certain: this wasn't merely a test of wealth or power. It was a test of survival, ingenuity, and integrity. Every decision he made tonight could determine not only the fate of his empire but his very life. With a final glance at the city skyline, Ethan tightened his coat, squared his shoulders, and stepped into the night. The first move in this high-stakes game had begun, and there was no turning back. The storage facility loomed ahead like a silent fortress, its corrugated metal walls glowing faintly under the dim streetlights. Ethan's breath came in measured bursts, his mind racing through every possibility. He approached the gate cautiously, scanning for cameras, sensors, or any sign of a trap. Every shadow seemed to twitch, every distant sound amplified. This wasn't just about wealth or influence anymore. Tonight, it was about survival. He slipped inside through a side door he had noted on the map, careful to avoid the main entrance where someone might be expecting him. The smell of oil and dust filled the air, mingling with the faint scent of machinery. Rows of crates and pallets created a maze of dark corridors, each one promising either opportunity or danger. Ethan's hand hovered near the concealed device in his coat pocket, ready for whatever might appear. Then he saw it, a small envelope taped to the side of a crate, black like the one from the drone. His heart raced as he opened it, revealing a single photograph and a handwritten note. "Trust is the first illusion. Look behind the mask." The photograph froze him in place. It was Donovan, smiling confidently, standing beside an unknown man whose face was partially shadowed. Yet something in Donovan's eyes, a subtle, almost imperceptible flicker of malice. Ethan's instincts screamed that this was a warning. But from whom? Donovan, his longtime ally and project partner, had always been meticulous and seemingly loyal. Could he now be part of the scheme? Or was someone trying to frame him? Ethan moved deeper into the storage facility, following a trail of envelopes, each one containing cryptic messages and photographs of familiar faces, partners, employees, even personal acquaintances. Every note carried a simple warning: not everyone is who they claim to be. The sense of betrayal began to twist in his gut. Could he really trust anyone in his inner circle? As he rounded a corner, a faint metallic click echoed from the ceiling. Instinctively, Ethan ducked just as a small drone zipped past, almost grazing his shoulder. It carried a miniature camera, transmitting live footage of his movements to someone watching from afar. This was more than a game, it was a psychological battlefield designed to destabilize him, to force him into mistakes. He found a small office space in the corner of the warehouse, lights dimmed, a single computer monitor flickering. On the screen was a live feed of his own penthouse, his desk, his private files, even his personal safe. Someone had hacked in, someone with resources, access, and a clear understanding of Ethan's vulnerabilities. Then the lights went out. Darkness enveloped the room, thick and suffocating. The only sound was his own heartbeat and the soft hum of electronic devices running unseen. Ethan drew a deep breath, forcing calm into his body. He knew panic would be a liability, strategy was his only weapon now. Suddenly, a voice echoed from the shadows, low and deliberate. "Impressive, Mr. Gray. You've made it this far. But this is where the first real choice begins." Ethan spun toward the voice, trying to locate its source. A figure stepped forward from the shadows, a woman, mid-30s, wearing a sleek black jacket and carrying a tablet. Her eyes glimmered with intelligence, but there was no warmth. "Who are you?" Ethan demanded. "Consider me a guide," she said, her voice carrying an edge that made Ethan's skin crawl. "I work for the one evaluating you. You've proven your wit, your courage, but loyalty, trust, and judgment, that's what separates winners from the rest." She handed him the tablet, and the screen displayed 3 separate locations across the city, each marked with a timer counting down. One of these locations holds critical information you need to survive the next stage. One will lead to a trap. One is irrelevant. Choose wisely. Ethan's mind raced. The stakes were escalating, and each decision carried consequences not just for his fortune, but potentially for his life. As he considered the 3 options, a chill ran down his spine: Donovan's photograph, the messages of betrayal, and the looming threat that someone close to him might not be who they seemed. The woman's eyes locked on his. "Time is short, Mr. Gray. Make your choice. Hesitation is as dangerous as failure." Ethan knew that this moment defined everything. The shadows of betrayal weren't just metaphors, they were real, tangible threats. Every relationship, every alliance, every decision he had ever made now seemed like a potential liability. But he also understood one truth: the game wasn't just testing him, it was teaching him. It was revealing weaknesses he didn't know he had, and forcing him to confront the cost of misplaced trust. He glanced at the timers again, analyzing patterns, cross-referencing addresses, evaluating risk. Every instinct, every skill he had honed over decades in business, came into play. He could feel the weight of the city pressing in, the darkness around him mirrored by the uncertainty gnawing at his mind. Ethan exhaled slowly, steeling himself. There was no room for doubt, no room for hesitation. The shadows of betrayal were closing in, but he would face them head-on. Whatever lay ahead in the first location, he would meet it with the sharpest mind and the clearest focus he had ever summoned. Tonight, alliances would be tested. Loyalties would fracture. And Ethan Gray, billionaire and strategist, would take his first decisive step in a game that promised nothing, and demanded everything. Ethan studied the 3 locations on the tablet one last time before making his decision. Each had its risks, each a potential trap, but instinct whispered at him, nudging him toward the northern warehouse district. He grabbed his coat, adjusted the hidden earpiece, and slipped out into the rain-soaked streets. The city was alive with flickering neon signs, the low hum of traffic, and the occasional distant siren. Yet, in this chaos, Ethan felt a strange sense of clarity. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil inside, but he was focused now, every nerve taut, every sense alert. As he arrived at the first location, a massive, abandoned textile factory, he noted the cracked windows and rusting machinery. The building had the air of neglect, but Ethan knew better. Whoever orchestrated this game wasn't careless. Every shadow might hide a surveillance camera, every corridor could be a trap. He pushed open the heavy metal doors, the screech echoing through the cavernous interior. Inside, the factory smelled of rust and damp concrete, a faint metallic tang lingering in the air. Machinery lay dormant, silent sentinels of a bygone era. Ethan's eyes scanned the room, catching movement in the shadows, subtle, almost imperceptible. He moved cautiously, every step deliberate. Then he heard it, a soft click, the faint whir of a hidden mechanism. From above, a series of lights flickered on, illuminating 3 figures seated at a long table. Masks covered their faces, disguising their identities, but their posture, the tension in their shoulders, and the careful way they handled the papers in front of them screamed authority. Ethan realized immediately, they weren't just thugs, they were highly trained operatives, part of the elaborate game he had been drawn into. A voice crackled through the earpiece. The first test is simple in concept, Ethan, but deadly in execution. You must retrieve the file at the center of the table without triggering any alarms. One wrong move, and the consequences will be severe. Your instincts and precision will decide your fate. Ethan's pulse quickened. He crouched behind a stack of crates, analyzing the patterns of light and shadow. The operatives were methodical, moving in synchronization, scanning their surroundings as if they were acutely aware of every possible intrusion. But Ethan noticed the gaps, tiny windows of opportunity. Timing would be everything. He began to move, a ghost among shadows, every step calculated. His hand brushed against the crates, feeling for loose edges or tripwires. Each movement was deliberate, a slow dance between life and death. A single misstep could set off silent alarms that would instantly notify those orchestrating the test. Ethan's mind raced, recalling lessons from years of business negotiations and high-stakes strategy. Anticipation, observation, and exploiting patterns were key. As he neared the table, a faint hum caught his attention, a hidden pressure sensor beneath the floorboards. His heart pounded. One false step, and the entire operation could collapse. He carefully shifted his weight, rolling his foot in a precise arc that avoided triggering the sensor. Inch by inch, he approached the table. At the center, the file lay under a glass case with an electronic lock. Ethan's fingers worked quickly, bypassing the mechanism with tools concealed in his coat. Beads of sweat formed on his brow, yet his hands remained steady. The room seemed to hold its breath, the tension almost tangible. Finally, the lock clicked open. Ethan retrieved the file, feeling the weight of not just the documents, but the knowledge that this was only the beginning. He was halfway through the test, and yet the real challenge, the understanding of who could be trusted, who was watching, and what true danger awaited, was only just beginning. As he retraced his steps, a soft creak echoed behind him. One of the operatives had noticed the movement. Ethan ducked behind a support beam, heart racing, mind sharpening. This was no longer about strategy alone, it was about instinct, reflex, and the ability to adapt in real time. He could hear the soft shuffle of footsteps, the sharp intake of breath. Every second counted. Sliding through a narrow passageway, Ethan finally made it to the exit. The rain had intensified, a curtain of water masking his escape. He emerged into the street, the file clutched tightly in his hands, and allowed himself a brief moment of relief. But he knew it was temporary. The first test was complete, but the stakes had escalated. The operatives were only one part of the challenge, the bigger game, the manipulation, the lies, and the betrayals, was looming just ahead. In the shadows, a figure watched him vanish into the night. A small smile played across her lips, the woman from the warehouse, the orchestrator of the test. "Impressive, Mr. Gray," she whispered. "But the real decisions are still to come. The game has only begun." Ethan vanished into the city's labyrinth, file in hand, mind sharpening, heart racing. He knew now that the billionaire world he thought he understood was nothing compared to the intricacies of the game unfolding. Loyalty, deception, and survival would collide in ways he couldn't yet imagine. And as the rain poured down, washing the streets in silver light, Ethan prepared for the trials that would define not just his fortune, but his life itself. Ethan returned to his penthouse apartment, the city lights painting streaks of gold and silver across the darkened skyline. The file rested heavily on his desk, its contents more than just numbers and business contracts. It was a blueprint of influence, power, and secrets buried deep within the billionaire network. But as he studied the documents, a chill ran down his spine. Something wasn't right. He noticed small anomalies, accounts he didn't recognize, meetings that had never been scheduled, and transfers that seemed deliberately designed to mislead. Someone was feeding him pieces of information, carefully curated, shaping his understanding of the game while concealing the real threats. The realization hit him: there were hidden enemies, and they were closer than he had imagined. A soft ping alerted him to a message on his secure phone. The screen displayed a simple line of text, "Trust no one. They're inside your circle." No signature. No traceable origin. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. The warning was clear, but it raised more questions than answers. Who within his circle had the access and motive to manipulate events so precisely? Could it be someone he had already encountered, someone he trusted? He replayed the last few days in his mind. The operatives at the warehouse, the orchestrator's subtle guidance, the carefully constructed tests, it all hinted at a layered strategy. The challenge was no longer just retrieving documents or surviving physical tests. Now, he had to identify the wolves in his midst. The billionaire world, glamorous and alluring from the outside, was a labyrinth of deception from within. As the hours ticked by, Ethan meticulously cross-referenced every name, transaction, and meeting. Patterns began to emerge, subtle but undeniable. A few individuals appeared repeatedly in the files, their influence invisible yet pervasive. These were people who thrived in the shadows, manipulating outcomes without ever stepping into the spotlight. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes, realizing he was playing a much larger game than he had first understood. Every ally could be an adversary, every handshake, a potential betrayal. He thought of Miranda, the enigmatic woman who had orchestrated the warehouse test. Was she guiding him toward the truth, or leading him deeper into the web of deceit? Ethan couldn't be sure. The next day, he arranged a meeting with an old friend and financial analyst, someone whose loyalty had been tested and proven in past crises. Sitting across from her in a quiet cafe, Ethan slid a copy of the file across the table. "I need your eyes on this," he said, his voice low. "Something's wrong. I can feel it. There are people inside my inner circle, people who don't want me to succeed." She studied the documents carefully, her brow furrowed in concentration. "These anomalies," she murmured, tracing lines on the page, "they're too calculated to be random. Someone wants to destabilize your position, make you question every decision. If you're not careful, Ethan, this isn't just about business, it's about control, manipulation, survival." The warning sent a shiver down his spine. Survival. The word echoed in his mind. In the past, Ethan had thrived on strategy, on knowing every move of his competitors. But this was personal. Hidden enemies could strike from anywhere, using knowledge of his habits, his schedule, even his relationships. Back at his penthouse that evening, Ethan prepared for what came next. He reviewed security footage, scanned communications, and re-evaluated every team member. The realization was undeniable: the people he had trusted the most could be the very ones plotting his downfall. And yet, he couldn't isolate the source. Each lead tangled into another, a complex web of deception. As midnight approached, a soft knock echoed through his apartment. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Who could it be at this hour? He reached for the concealed handgun in his drawer but kept his tone calm as he called out, "Who's there?" A shadow stepped into the dim light. It was Jordan, his longtime aide, the one person he had never doubted. Yet even as Jordan smiled, there was a subtle tension in his posture that made Ethan hesitate. "You weren't answering my calls," Jordan said, voice smooth. "I thought I'd check in." Ethan's instincts screamed caution. Every fiber of his being told him that trust had become a dangerous luxury. "Did you see the file?" Ethan asked, measuring his words carefully. Jordan nodded slowly. "I did. And I think you're right, there are people in your circle who aren't who they seem." The revelation was sobering. Even the people closest to him could harbor hidden agendas. Ethan realized that the first step in surviving this game wasn't confrontation, it was observation, patience, and meticulous strategy. He would have to uncover every secret, anticipate every move, and protect not just his wealth, but his life. As he watched Jordan leave, Ethan felt the weight of the challenge ahead. The first test had been physical. The second was psychological. And now, the true game had begun, identifying the hidden enemies and ensuring that every piece on the board moved according to his design. The billionaire world was no longer just a playground of power and luxury, it was a battlefield where loyalty, deception, and cunning determined who would rise and who would fall. And Ethan was ready to face it, knowing that a single mistake could cost him everything. Ethan spent the following days digging deeper into the web of deceit surrounding him. Each piece of data he uncovered suggested a carefully orchestrated plan to weaken him from the inside. But just as he began mapping the layers of betrayal, an unexpected email appeared in his encrypted inbox. The subject line was simple: opportunity, or oblivion. His pulse quickened. The sender was unknown, yet the message carried an unmistakable air of power and authority. The email outlined a clandestine deal, a chance to acquire a massive asset that could cement Ethan's dominance in the billionaire network, but with a caveat: the transaction required working with someone whose reputation was shadowy, controversial, and, in many circles, outright dangerous. Ethan leaned back in his chair, weighing his options. He had always believed that risk was part of success, that fortune favored those bold enough to act where others hesitated. Yet this felt different. This wasn't just a gamble with money, it was a test of judgment, morality, and survival. The stakes weren't only financial, they were personal, potentially putting him at the mercy of hidden enemies. Still, Ethan knew he couldn't ignore the opportunity. If he played his cards correctly, he could not only uncover the traitors within his circle but also gain leverage against them. He called an urgent meeting with Miranda, who had become both his confidant and strategic partner over the past weeks. Sitting across from her in his private conference room, he explained the situation. This deal, he began cautiously, it's risky, and it's shadowed with unknown players. But if we pass it up, we might lose our edge, and the people we think are allies could use it against us. Miranda studied him with a calculating gaze. Ethan, you're right. The risk is immense, but opportunity rarely knocks twice. Whoever is behind this isn't just testing your courage, they're testing your instinct for power, your ability to anticipate moves that others don't see. We have to prepare for everything. They spent the next several hours analyzing the details, cross-referencing potential partners, and modeling outcomes for every possible scenario. The more they dug, the more they realized the magnitude of the deal. It wasn't merely an asset acquisition, it was a pivot point that could either elevate Ethan's empire or completely dismantle it. As night fell, Ethan reviewed the contacts involved in the deal. One name stood out, familiar yet unsettling: Viktor Rasov, a billionaire investor notorious for his ruthless methods and shadowy alliances. Rumors about him circulated in whispers, stories of boardroom manipulations, corporate espionage, and enemies who vanished under mysterious circumstances. The man was dangerous, but his resources were unparalleled. Ethan knew he couldn't face this alone. He needed a team capable of moving unseen, acting decisively, and anticipating betrayal at every turn. He called in his closest advisors, each chosen not only for their skills but for their loyalty under pressure. Together, they devised a meticulous plan: engage Viktor, assess his intentions, and secure the asset without revealing vulnerabilities. The following day, Ethan boarded a private jet bound for a discreet location where Viktor was rumored to operate. The moment he stepped into the lavish, dimly lit lounge, he felt the weight of the room. Wealth, power, and intimidation were palpable, hanging in the air like a storm about to break. Viktor himself emerged from the shadows, tall, impeccably dressed, with a gaze sharp enough to cut glass. "Ethan," Viktor said, his voice smooth yet commanding. "I've been expecting you. I hear you're interested in the shadow deal." "Yes," Ethan replied evenly, hiding the swirl of tension inside. "But I need to understand exactly what I'm getting into. Transparency is key, any misstep, and everything is at risk." Viktor chuckled softly, a sound devoid of humor. "Transparency? In our world, transparency is a luxury. But you intrigue me, Ethan. Most people would run at the first sign of risk. You, at least, want to understand the game before it consumes you." Negotiations began, layered with strategy, subtle threats, and psychological maneuvering. Ethan realized quickly that every word, every gesture, carried meaning. Victor tested him, probing for weaknesses, watching for hesitation, measuring trust. Ethan held his ground, careful not to reveal too much, yet careful enough to maintain credibility. Hours passed. Deals were proposed, counteroffers made, and hidden clauses scrutinized with surgical precision. Ethan's mind raced, constantly analyzing not just the numbers but the intentions behind every move. He sensed a larger narrative at play, a story beyond this transaction, one that could expose the hidden enemies manipulating his empire from the shadows. By the time the negotiation concluded, Ethan had secured the deal, but not without a lingering sense of unease. Victor's approval had been hard-earned, yet the conversation hinted at further tests, more challenges, and dangers yet unseen. Ethan left the meeting with the asset, a crucial victory, but he knew that the true challenge was only beginning. As the private jet soared above the city lights on his return flight, Ethan stared out at the horizon. The billionaire world was a battlefield, where wealth alone wasn't enough. Survival demanded intellect, foresight, and the ability to discern friend from foe in a landscape filled with hidden enemies. And Ethan realized that, in this game, every move from now on could be a matter of life or death. Ethan returned from the shadow deal with a mixture of triumph and unease. The acquisition had strengthened his empire, but Victor's veiled warnings lingered in his mind. Something about the negotiations didn't sit right, the subtle shifts in tone, the calculated glances, the unspoken implications. He had survived the meeting, but he couldn't shake the feeling that a trap was quietly being set. The first sign of trouble came the following morning. His analytics team discovered anomalies in financial transactions, small, almost imperceptible inconsistencies that suggested someone within his inner circle was siphoning funds and leaking sensitive information. At first, Ethan hoped it was a simple error, a miscalculation in the system. But as he dug deeper, the pattern became undeniable. Betrayal had taken root where he least expected it. Someone close to him, someone he trusted implicitly, had been working against him. His pulse quickened as he reviewed security footage, email logs, and access records. Each new piece of evidence painted a chilling picture, a calculated infiltration designed to undermine his empire from the inside. Ethan called Miranda into his private office, her expression immediately shifting from curiosity to concern as she saw the urgency in his eyes. "Miranda, I need your full attention," he said, locking the door behind her. "We have a mole. Someone in this building has been betraying us, feeding information to an outside entity, possibly Victor, possibly worse." Miranda's eyes narrowed. "Do you have any idea who it could be?" Ethan shook his head. "Not yet. But whoever it is, they're smart, patient, and dangerously confident. And they're right under our noses. I need you to help me find them before they do irreparable damage." Over the next several days, they operated with surgical precision, analyzing every transaction, monitoring every communication, and observing behavior with an almost obsessive intensity. Suspicion fell on a few individuals, but nothing concrete emerged, until a late-night audit revealed a hidden file transfer initiated from the personal terminal of one of Ethan's most trusted advisors, Gregory. Gregory had been with Ethan since the early days of his rise to power, a man who had helped build the empire from scratch. Loyal, competent, and respected, he had earned Ethan's complete trust. The revelation hit Ethan like a physical blow. Gregory wasn't just betraying him, he was using his intimate knowledge of the company's operations to manipulate outcomes, divert resources, and secretly collaborate with external adversaries. Ethan confronted Gregory in his office, the tension between them palpable. "Gregory, we need to talk," he said evenly, though every word was edged with controlled fury. Gregory looked up, feigning innocence. "Talk about what, Ethan?" "I've been working hard to keep everything running smoothly." Ethan slammed a folder of evidence onto the desk. "This. All of this. The hidden transfers, the leaks, the coded communications. I trusted you. I trusted you more than anyone in this company. And you," he paused, struggling to keep his voice from breaking, "you've been undermining everything we built." "Why?" Gregory's face remained calm, almost chillingly so. Ethan, you think in black and white, but this is the world we live in. Loyalty is fluid, alliances shift, and power belongs to those willing to seize it. I did what I had to do to survive, and to profit. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. He realized then that Victor's warnings had not been idle threats. This was the danger Victor had hinted at, betrayal disguised as allegiance, sabotage hidden behind smiles and nods. Gregory had been playing a double game, confident that Ethan would never suspect the man he called his closest ally. I gave you everything, Gregory. My trust, my guidance, my empire, Ethan said, his voice low but furious. And you threw it away for what? Money? Influence? Or just the thrill of watching me fall? Gregory leaned back, unfazed. Perhaps all three. You'll see, Ethan, sometimes the strongest move is to cut ties and let the storm decide who survives. You'll understand one day. Ethan had no choice. Gregory was immediately removed from all positions of authority, his access revoked, and legal proceedings initiated. Yet even as the man was escorted out of the building, Ethan knew this was only the beginning. The betrayal had left scars, not just in his operations, but in his psyche. Trust had become a fragile commodity, and every handshake, every contract, every alliance now carried a shadow of doubt. That night, Ethan sat alone in his office, staring at the skyline of the city sprawled beneath him. The lights shimmered like distant stars, beautiful yet cold. He knew the billionaire world was a battlefield, but now he understood that the war wasn't always visible. Sometimes the enemy was the one who smiled beside you, the one you shared victories with, the one you believed was unshakably loyal. Ethan's mind raced with strategies, countermeasures, and contingency plans. The shadow deal had secured him assets, but the betrayal within had exposed vulnerabilities that no amount of wealth could fully protect. And somewhere, in the darkness beyond his vision, the forces that conspired against him were already planning their next move. He tightened his grip on the armrest of his chair, determination hardening into resolve. Betrayal in plain sight had tested him, but it would not break him. Ethan vowed that he would rebuild, fortify, and ensure that no one, not even those he trusted most, could manipulate or control his destiny again. The game had changed. And now, Ethan was playing with every piece on the board, fully aware that the stakes were higher than ever. The city skyline glowed beneath Ethan's penthouse as dawn broke, painting the glass towers in shades of amber and gold. He had survived betrayal, loss, and deception, and yet the battles were far from over. The exposure of Gregory's duplicity had shaken his empire, but it had also awakened something within him, a resolve sharper than any weapon, a clarity that only hardship could forge. Ethan had spent the past week reconstructing his operations, scrutinizing every contract, and establishing security protocols that would leave no room for manipulation. Yet as he reviewed his plans, one name kept resurfacing: Victor. The mysterious adversary who had first warned him about betrayal and now lingered as a shadow at the edges of his vision. Ethan knew the final confrontation was inevitable. It came in the form of a private gala at the city's most exclusive tower. Victor had orchestrated the event with meticulous precision, inviting key players from finance, politics, and international business. The undercurrent of tension was palpable, every handshake, every toast, carried unspoken agendas. Ethan entered with the poise of a man who had endured the storm and emerged sharper, a presence commanding respect and fear in equal measure. Victor approached, his smile calm, almost predatory. "Ethan, I must admit, you've exceeded my expectations," he said, voice smooth and measured. "You've survived the internal collapse, exposed your mole, and yet, you stand here unbroken. Impressive." Ethan's gaze was steady. "Impressive enough to stop me?" Victor chuckled softly. "Perhaps. But more importantly, impressive enough to earn my respect. Power is nothing without vigilance, Ethan. You've learned that the hard way." The tension between them was electric, but Ethan didn't flinch. He had studied Victor's moves, predicted the psychological gambits, and fortified himself against manipulation. Every threat, every hidden motive, every whispered deal that had once unsettled him now fueled a calm, unshakable confidence. Suddenly, the room's attention shifted as news flashed across the event's monitors. A critical acquisition deal that had been presumed under Victor's control was, in fact, secured entirely by Ethan. The audience gasped. Murmurs spread. This was not just a victory in financial terms, but a declaration of dominance. Victor's carefully constructed network had been dismantled without violence, without exposure, through strategy, foresight, and ruthlessness tempered by ethics. Ethan turned toward Victor, the weight of triumph in his posture. "You taught me the lesson," he said. "Loyalty is fragile, power is tested in shadows, and strength comes not from fear, but from clarity. I've learned well." Victor's expression shifted, a flicker of surprise passing across his features. So this is the man who emerged from betrayal, stronger, sharper, and unbroken. Perhaps there is hope for the world of power yet. In the following weeks, Ethan consolidated his empire with unwavering authority. The betrayal of Gregory became a cautionary tale, an internal lesson in vigilance. He rewarded loyalty, nurtured talent, and built alliances grounded in transparency and mutual respect, a radical shift in a world dominated by deception. Yet his greatest victory was personal. Ethan had faced not only the external threats to his empire, but the internal tumult, the fear, the doubt, and the pain of trusting the wrong people. By confronting and surviving the chaos, he had reshaped his understanding of strength. He realized that power alone was hollow unless accompanied by discernment, integrity, and resilience. As he stood on his balcony one evening, looking out over the illuminated city, Ethan allowed himself a rare smile. The empire was secure, but more than that, he felt an inner peace born of trials survived and lessons learned. The betrayals had tested him, the adversaries had pushed him to the edge, but from the ashes of deception and distrust, he had risen, not just as a billionaire, but as a man refined by challenge and defined by his choices. The final message was clear: wealth could build towers, buy influence, and command respect, but it was character, courage, and the ability to rise after every fall that created true legacy. Ethan's story became one not just of financial dominance, but of human resilience, a testament that in the face of treachery, survival and triumph are possible for those who refuse to surrender. And in that quiet moment, as the city hummed beneath him, Ethan knew, he would never be caught off guard again. He had risen from the ashes, and nothing, not betrayal, not manipulation, not even fear itself, could take him down.